was looking forward to this yesterday, Lindsay, and after all the craziness of yesterday, I was so relieved when both Meredith and Sydney told us that we would be getting Annette Wilcox back on the show in short order, and she is here this morning. The name of the book is Bumping the Dock, a story of God's grace and an 18-wheeler. I will keep this short to get Annette into the game here. Out-of-work librarian, divorced, alone, in her 50s, and now here we are with a book and an amazing career and millions of safe miles driving. Annette, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So let's just jump in and kind of talk about, and I don't want to give away the whole game here, but I want you to kind of talk about your journey behind the wheel of a truck. What's more important is the fact that you don't sugarcoat it in the book. You don't open up by saying, I immediately gravitated behind the wheel, and from that moment on I was a truck driver. It's a transition period, and you give a real honest accounting early on about how difficult this was for you, and then how it stops being difficult after a while because you really get into it. Can you kind of unpack that for our listeners?
Well, I think the skill that I had, a couple of things. One is that I was basically very rootless. I think a lot of people don't make it in the trucking world because they have a home and they'd really like to be there. I've lived in 9 states now in 4 different countries, so where I am is home. Another thing is that from the time I was a little girl, we had done long car trips. When I was used to them, my parents always said I'd crossed the country 7 times before I was 10, most of them in a car, and I learned map reading pretty early on. And I liked driving. I liked traveling, in fact. So those are things that made it possible for me to be a trucker. On the other hand, while I'm very detail-oriented, I proofread people's books occasionally, for example, and if you misplace a comma, I will notice that. But if there's a stair step where there's always been a stair step, I may well trip on it. How long has this been here? Well, 47 years, yes. So that has been a problem.
I was going to ask you really quickly to kind of pick up on that as well, in the sense that you talk about, your experiences as a teacher too, and there is a certain meticulous love of the meticulous when it comes to especially grading an English paper and all that kind of stuff. And people don't realize that's a really great understanding that some people don't have. You are able to make that connection. It happens in the book too, where you connect your life as a teacher to your life as a trucker. Is that an epiphany moment? I mean, is that a road to Damascus moment when you say, oh, wait, that's just like this? Can you talk about making the connections between, as you say, being on the road, learning to read a map, being rootless and all that kind of stuff? What is the click point where you realize it's more than just this is the only option I have, and it becomes this is the option I want?
Well, I don't know. I was a couple of years into it when, as I wrote in the book, when my friend Janet, who had been a trucker from the early 70s, who knows how many millions of miles she's driven. But at a certain point she said to me, it should be getting easier by now. And it wasn't. But about 5 or 6 weeks later, I suddenly realized, wait, I think she's right. I think it's getting easier. Because my emotions weren't involved anymore. You should have seen me in the first year that I drove. I'd go into a receiver and I'd say, please give me an easy place because I'm a beginner. And there was all this tension about it. But then later on, I met a woman who's been trucking 10 years. She said, I'm a lousy backer. I've always been a lousy backer. And she just seemed very used to it and working with it. And I think that's the point I got to. Besides my backing, it slowly did ratchet up to a somewhat better level.
Annette, you talk about, so we have an ongoing theme this weekend about new beginnings on the show. People have been calling in, talking to us about some of their new beginnings in life. And so reinventing ourselves is that keeps coming up. And you talk about in the book about in 2004, you lost your hearing, and I believe you said you're in your left ear, right? Is that correct?
True.
Same as Jimmy Mack, by the way, our co-host here. And you said that ended your career as both a cellist. I'm a musician, so I understand how gut-wrenching that must have been, but ended your career as a cellist and a teacher. And as hard as that was in that moment, and to know that kind of everything and going through a divorce, all those things were ending. Now can you look back on it and see, wow, that happened which led me to start this new career, become a driver. Now I'm an author because of it. Are you able to, I mean, obviously you can piece that together, but to see the positive and have that reminder of in times of chaos, there's something coming and, made you the Renaissance woman that you are.
Well, yes, and farther back than that even because I don't think I've had a very stable sort of life. We had a family friend of my father's, a Swiss physicist, who and his English wasn't completely native, but he told me one time that he admired the way I kept recycling myself. So, which I thought was a funny way of putting it. I started out, instead of going and working at McDonald's when I was 16, I started typing my dad's manuscripts, math research. So I did that for about 15 years in various secretarial jobs, and then I went to college. By then I had the children, of course, and that's a lot of occupation. But I went to college always trying to find something where I could practically make money, but I couldn't do it, partly because I had 4 children and, I got a degree in economics, but I couldn't put 70 or 80 hours a week into a job living in San Francisco or New York City because I had 4 children. And so then I went to the teaching English, and then from teaching English and library came in there, and then trucking. So I've always just kept going from thing to thing.
And it's such a funny thing because the language you speak in, and you're talking about your experience as a wanderer, as an adventurer, as a thinker, as a writer, as somebody who also has to has a home hub. It's funny because even before you get to trucking, you're right. The metaphor of your life sounding like the life of a trucker is really, really clear. One of the things you do beautifully in the book is that if a person is not a trucker, the access that you give them to that profession, do you feel like at times that it feels like you're almost in a classroom? I don't mean this didactically, that the writing is boring or done like the worst kind of teacher, but the exact kind of opposite. Do you feel like that part of the mission in writing the book was to let people who don't do this for a living understand all of the ins and outs and the responsibilities of what it means to be a trucker? Was that part of, I guess, the theme of the book, to help people understand not just your story, but what so many men and women are doing out there on the road?
Well, I think it's happened, but it was completely serendipitous. So I've got various friends who have read it, women, who know nothing about trucking, or even men. Several times it's been said to me, I'll never look at a semi the same way again. And then one of the women said, and I was sitting at a light, and there was a semi, and I thought, I should let him go. So I let him go. So I said, well, okay, to myself, I said, driver's ed isn't what I thought I was doing here, but I'm not against it.
You make me laugh. I wasn't kidding when I said this at the beginning. I said this over the break to you. My mom is a lifelong teacher who, loves her son very much and loves what he does and wants to know more about it and listens to the weekday show in an attempt to learn. I'm going to give her a copy of this book and say, Mom, if you really want to get a sense of this from a person who has your perspective as well, not just a trucker's perspective, you should really go with this book. It's by Annette Wilcox. It is called Bumping the Dock, A Story of God's Grace in an 18-Wheeler. When we come back on the other side of this break, I want to talk about God's grace for a second here, too, because your faith informs this book so much as well, and it's a quiet faith, a faith of simply getting the job done week by week, day by day. We'll be right back after these messages. Lindsay Lawler and myself are talking with Annette Wilcox. We'll be back after this. Very cool morning. I'm glad you could be with us, Annette.
Wouldn't it be great to talk one-on-one with someone who knows and cares? Well, that's what happens when you call the Mattson and Kellogg's Benefits Group. M&K developed a benefits program just for owner-operators, and it works. They saw that too many owner-operators were either underinsured or had no insurance coverage at all. So Mattson and Kellogg provide owner-operators financial protection and peace of mind, so being an independent trucker doesn't have to be scary. Call the old-fashioned way at 315-834-3222, 315-834-3222, or go to mkbenefitsgroup.com.
Hello, I'm Barry Richards, President of Travel Centers of America. A TA citizen driver brings respect and honor to the trucking industry by living the values of community involvement, leadership, health and wellness, and safety. From now through the end of December, we're accepting nominations at ta-petro.com/citizen driver. If you know someone who exemplifies excellence on the roads we drive, nominate them by December 31st for the chance to celebrate their commitment to the industry. And remember, you can even nominate yourself. Visit ta-petro.com/citizen driver.
And we're back. It's Jimmy Mack and Lindsay Lawler here on Dave Nemo Weekends on Sirius XM 146 Road Dog Trucking. We're here with our guest and friend Annette Wilcox, author of Bumping the Dock, a story of God's grace and an 18-wheeler. If that ain't country music, I don't know what is.
There it is right
Thank
there.
you, Annette, for being here with us today. She was supposed to be with us yesterday, but she's come back for the reboot today. Annette, this book is great, and everyone can go to Radio Nemo and see it in the Sleeper Cab series. I wanted to ask you too. I really loved this. You mentioned just a bit ago about that you typed your dad's manuscripts, but that you say in your own writing, you feel like you write on paper instead of typing because C.S. Lewis did. I love this, and the clicking of the keys distracts from the rhythm of the sentences. I'm a songwriter, and I believe the same thing. I believe there's something in the manifestation of paper to pen and putting it down and not, I think the words get lost in typing as well. So can you talk a little bit about that method behind it, both in your writing too, and just the kind of the power of the paper to pen and how your words can come to life a little more in that regard?
Well, there's a woman who wrote a book about writing fiction that was published back in the 50s, I think, and she said the process is to just write it red hot. Don't worry about editing it until you've got it down on paper. And I think that's what I've done. But more than that, though, once word processing came into it, I think it got even worse than C.S. Lewis said, at least for me, because if I try to write a first draft on a word processor, the words are scrolling off the top. And I get confused, like, wait, because quite often I want to look back a couple pages and say, I need to put that in or I need to move it here. And with word processing, I simply can't. And doing a first draft just on a yellow pad scribbling, I'm probably the only one who could read that, and I can't always. But then you have a chance to shuffle everything around.
Yeah, well, typewriters can be typewriters. Who am I, 90? But they can be a creativity killer a bit. If you're thinking about, you can't get that. That's why I say, free writing every morning, which is such a hassle. But there's stuff in there that we don't realize we got to get out quickly. And I'm so glad you did it because these stories are important. So. Yeah,
and I was going to say that anybody who actually has sat with me and done a show with me, Lindsay's not having this experience this morning because we've been flying by the seat of our pants. I hand write out every show.
It's
rather
incredible.
than type it, I hand write out every show, and it and getting that piece of information, it gave me an affinity with you. The other thing, and by the way, I want to see if we can make a connection here. For me, there are people who will wash dishes in the morning and use it as an act of prayer, an act of meditation. For me, handwriting in a journal, on a notebook, for me is an act of grace and an act of faith and an act of prayer. I'm hoping that the words are there, but it also puts me in a really kind of meditative state. This book, in many ways, is as much about faith in yourself and faith in your God. Can you talk a little bit about how that informs your writing and how that informs the story itself?
Well, I don't write every day, for one thing. I write when things bother me in a particular way. And I wrote some vignettes about being in Africa, for example, because that bothered me in a certain way. And I've written a whole other book called Sharon, which was basically about a little girl I had in a Montessori class. It was a combined second, third grade. And she was a very, very good student, but her father had just been diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they weren't Christians, and she was scared to death the whole year. And that bothered me in a way that when I went to Africa, I wrote this book, and I made the thing come out the way I would have liked it to come out, and that dealt with it. The book Bumping the Dock, what I did was I could feel myself losing the beginner's perspective, and that's what I wanted in this book. So tired as I was the first year or two that I drove, I made myself write 3 pages every night before I went to sleep. Couldn't go to sleep unless I'd written 3 pages, which is not that much handwritten. But that got me the first draft. And then from that point, I just edited it pretty much.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, there's something really nice about that. And people often forget that, whether they're losing weight, whether they're working out, whether they are learning a new skill, whether they're writing a book, is that there is a lesson to be learned driving behind the wheel. I tell a lot of my friends who drive, who want to write books or want to tell stories or do that, I said, then you do it every day in the same way that you get a little bit closer to your destination. You really kind of understand the connection between what it means to take a trip. You are able to make the connection between that and what it means to create work. And that does show that discovery of it not being so terrifying. It's not a matter, like I said, there's no road to Damascus moment so much in this book as there is a sense of these small little minor moments of grace. Just to let our listeners know, you really made an effort to maintain your faith on the road, which a lot of people, while they can maintain a personal relationship with their faith, they often have a hard time practicing it. Can you talk about what it meant for you to actually engage in practicing your faith while being an over-the-road driver?
Well, I wasn't a Christian at all until 1974 when I was 20, and I wasn't a Catholic until 1999. But in 1974, when I had a conversion experience and started going to church, it was a non-denominational, charismatic type of church. And the pastor of that church said, Christians go to church on Sunday. That's what they do. They do it if they feel like it, and they do it if they don't feel like it, and they just do it. So I've always had that as a basic. And then once I was a Catholic, of course, we're bound to go to Mass on Sunday, minimally, unless there's a good reason not to. And that's where the Catholic Church is so beautiful. You have to do the thing unless you can't do it, and then you don't have to do it. So I've worked with that and was able to get up a collection of churches. I'm grieved if I miss Mass on Sunday, and actually, almost since I first became a Christian, I've felt called to be what I call a daily communicant. I go to church every day unless I can't. If I'm raising children and getting them off to school, that doesn't honor God to run out and leave them to do whatever they might do. So there have been whole decades when I couldn't do it. But then on vacation, I always did. And now I'm back in the position where I can go every day. But it was a challenge, and I've gotten into trouble both with a car and a truck trying to get to church sometimes. But I gradually made a little collection of places that I knew I could get to. And my last company sometimes tolerated me going kind of out of route to get to Effingham, Illinois, for example, where I knew I could get to church.
Well, I know you do your rosary prayers every morning as well. So hopefully you can include us in those. And
yeah, please.
Please.
My mother would consider it a great favor if you'd actually throw me in the midst of all the rest of your prayers. I have a quote from C.S. Lewis for you that I actually think sets up a really nice question. First, I do not sit down at my desk to put into verse something that is already clear in my mind. If it were clear in my mind, I should have no incentive or need to write about it. We do not write in order to be understood. We write in order to understand. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, it feels like this book is an attempt to understand. What I would ask you, without getting into the details of the book, because I want people to read, of course, this wonderful book, Bumping the Dock. Can you tell us what it is you came to understand over the course of those 3 pages a night?
Well, I think there's a very fundamental thing that when you have trouble, it can bring you closer to the Lord, or it can drive you away from the Lord. I've known a couple of cases where someone's child or grandchild died in infancy, and it hardened them towards the Lord. And that's the wrong response to trouble. As long as you can let trouble make you cling even closer to God, then you're okay.
I wanted to also follow up in regards to trouble because I wanted to ask you this, and you don't have to answer it. But so many things you have mastered. As your journey on the road continues, Annette, I'm curious as to, is there anything you still want to get? I mean, you want to get better at everything, of course, but is there anything you still want to master in your journeys? Anything that you feel like you can still get better at, that you have
Backing
a good
up.
Along with backing up, is there anything that you're still working on and feel like, I'm going to get this? There are things, we realize I'm never going to be good at this, but I'm going to live with that and make my adjustments. But are there things you're hoping to even improve upon, new adventures, new journeys? What's the next big thing in regards to your trucking adventure?
Well, I'm torn two ways. One is to get this other book, Sharon, which actually preceded Bumping the Dock. I need to find an illustrator and get it published. But the thing I work on every day is improving my Swahili. And it's just a pity that I didn't learn it earlier and that my hearing is so bad, because I get better and better at it. But my goodness, I've been working on it since I was in Africa now. Any child would have learned it in a year, huh? But I play Duolingo every day with Swahili, and it's nice.
Are you able to still play I know you not, practicing cello as much. Are you able to still play and get back to your musical roots at all and work with that through the hearing loss?
It's completely impossible. And in fact, I gave the cello to my youngest daughter, and I gave the violin to a grandson who's studying violin. And even the piano now, I've been having trouble with arthritis in my hands, and my ring finger makes it impossible for me to type with comfort or to play the piano at all. So I'm about to go back to the recorder or whistling or something just to make music.
Well, you can write songs. I know that because you've got stories, and I'm going to send you, if you will, a song that I wrote for women in trucking, because I appreciate you're not only a truck driver, you're a female truck driver, and we have a lot of listeners that are in your same boat, and I just appreciate the strength you have and encouraging others, especially females, that you can do anything. Back that truck, girl.
Well, I think the strength that women have, one of them is customer service.
Absolutely.
A man will only take a certain amount of pushing, and then his self-respect requires him to push back. And that always makes the situation worse, not better.
What do you mean? What are you talking about? What do you mean?
Just forget it. This interview's over.
This is
over.
over.
Wait, it actually almost is.
Annette, we do have to go. I want to do this really quickly. Bumping the Dock, a story of God's grace and an 18-wheeler. Annette Wilcox has joined us this morning. I want you guys to head over to radionemo.com/library. Please check out the book. Please click there so you can make sure you get a copy of it. If you have friends who want to know more about trucking from a layman's perspective and a professional's perspective at the same time, this is a remarkable gift to give them. Annette, thank you very much, and you have the best of Sundays. And thank you for making time for us on what I know is an important day for you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Annette.
I appreciate it, too, and it is available on Audible now. So.
Oh, there you go.
Perfect.
It's available on Audible. Okay, guys.
Her words and her words through her voice.
And you got to hear it, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you, Annette, for being a part of us this morning. We really appreciate it. When we come back on the other side, we got another great guest, don't we?
We are guesties today. Another great book that I flew through. I'm going to become more of a reader than I ever anticipated.
It's pretty terrific, isn't it? I mean, I got to hear the great gift of this show, along with getting the chance to do it with you and Sid the Not So Vicious and make so many wonderful friends, is people like Elsa. And please forgive me, it's Hunessen. Elsa Hunessen is going to be joining us. Being Seen, one deaf-blind woman's fight to end ableism, which recently won the Washington State Book Award for biography and memoir. It was published in hardcover by Simon & Schuster last year, and you can find it. You can find it at the library on radionemo.com.